So I'm talking about the forever friendship of Ruth and Naomi. Ruth and Naomi, who came together in kind of an interesting way. If you know their story, Naomi was Ruth's mother-in-law. And I think about the stories of other people who are forever friends. Because Ruth and Naomi weren't related. Those are the kinds of relationships that we tend to think of as lasting a lifetime, right? Siblings, parents and children, right? Mother and child, like we're talking about today, like we've talked about and celebrated today. But Ruth and Naomi came together under different circumstances. So when I think about their relationship and other relationships that we can point to in our society and our culture that are these forever friendships, these companionships that are chosen and not just the ones we're born into. Those are important too. But I think about, where do we find those kinds of forever friendships? I need to turn it on. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Hey, look at that. It worked. Okay, so what brings together forever friends? Where do we see these other friendships, these other relationships? And when I was thinking about this and preparing this message, I thought immediately of what? Marriage. Look at those two kids. Aren't they so cute? That's Richard and myself almost 20 years ago this summer. And when two people come together and make a promise to stay together forever, that's this kind of friendship. The other thing that I thought of was adoption, where someone says to someone else, "You are now part of my family." And this is my favorite story of adoption. I don't know if you're familiar with Anne of Green Gables, but it's about a girl who was sent to the wrong family. They had ordered a little boy orphan to come and help work on the farm. And when she got there, they almost didn't keep her. But there's a very moving scene between Matthew as he is dying and Anne, where he says to her, she says, "I'm so sorry I couldn't have been a boy." Oh, I'm going to cry. "I'm so sorry that I couldn't be a boy for you." And he says, "I never wanted anyone but you. There was only ever you from the beginning, from the time I met you." And so this is another place where we find these forever friendships, these commitments between people who are not related to stick it out through thick and thin. This is the other one that came to mind. Now, you may not be familiar with this. This is an illustration from a storybook, but this is Gandalf pulling Samwise Gamgee in through the window by his ear because he was eavesdropping under the window. That grass needed some trimming, is what he said. And Gandalf sets him on a journey with Frodo to carry the ring to Mordor. And so for those of you who are sci-fi and fantasy fans, Sam is loyal to Frodo until the end, but it wasn't a journey he signed up for. When he was eavesdropping under that window, he wasn't looking to get roped into a committed companionship, but that's what he was assigned by Gandalf. So sometimes we choose that committed companionship, like in marriage or like in adoption. Sometimes it comes with things we don't always expect, like with Anne of Green Gables. But sometimes God takes us by the ear and says, "You are going to be committed to this person." And so we have the story of Gandalf and Samwise. Now we're going to turn to Naomi's story. The book of Ruth is called Ruth, but it really is the story of Naomi. It starts with her and it ends with her. This is her story, and it's not a pretty story. I mean, it's tough. It is difficult. But God gives her a companion to walk through that story with her. Someone to say to her, "I'm going to be by your side." So this is Naomi's story that we'll explore together this morning. This is from Ruth 1, verses 1 through 5. So we're going to hit several different scriptures, but we're not going to read the whole thing because it's long, okay? But this is what it says. "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Malon and Chilion. And they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem. And they went to Moab, and they lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. And after they had lived there about 10 years, both Malon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. That's a great, once upon a time, isn't it? That's a great story. It makes me want to, jump up and, no, it's a terrible story. It's terrible, and it just started. Here she was a woman who had a husband and who had sons, which in that culture was she was good to go. She had her husband, she had her 2 sons, not just 1 son, 2 sons. Things got rough at home, and so they left and went to the neighboring country of Moab to ride out a time of famine. And while they were there, the worst possible thing could happen, and her husband died. So now she has her 2 sons, and we don't know when Naomi and Elimelech, when they moved to Moab, we don't know how old they were, we don't know how old their kids were, okay? We don't know how long they lived there before Malon died. We don't know how long they lived there before Chilion died. We know that after Elimelech died, there were 10 years in there where these 2 boys were married, and they produced no children. And at the end of the day, she's left with nothing, right? She's left with nothing. She goes from full to empty. And Naomi looks at her life, and she looks at her hands, and she has empty hands. Not only is her life empty, but she has nothing to offer, which really is truly the bottom of the barrel, right? It's one thing when we don't have anything for ourselves, but when we literally have nothing to offer to any person in our lives, we feel like we're left with empty hands. We really feel at the bottom of ourselves and at the bottom of our story. So Naomi is left with one thing that she can offer her daughters-in-law, and that is to set them free. It's all she has left to offer them. And she says to her daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." And she kissed them, and she wept aloud. And they said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." It's their initial response. That says something about Naomi, doesn't it? That her 2 daughters-in-law would leave their people and go back with her to Israel. They make this commitment. They make this commitment to stick together. They say, "No way, we are not going back. We are staying with you. We are staying with you." But Naomi isn't having any of it. She says to them, "No." No. "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? I have nothing to offer you. Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. And even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." They say, "We want to come with you." And she says, "I have nothing to offer. You want to come with me? We will all starve to death together." That's the only thing she has to offer them. She can't offer them the protection of a home. She can't offer them the protection of a husband. In that culture, and this is a concept that is going to be at play in this story, if she would have had another husband and she would have had another son, then that son could have married one of these gals, and they could have produced children for their dead husbands and for Elimelech, who had died. She says that's not going to happen, ladies. That's just not going to happen, because God's hand has turned against me. Literally, she felt that God had cursed her. And don't we feel that way? When we go from full to empty, don't we feel that way? We feel like I've got nothing. I must have done something. God's hand has turned against me. And after hearing this, they wept aloud again, and then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung to her. So after all of this persuading, Orpah turns back. She turns back. It's too much for her. She takes a look at what she's committing to. She takes a look at the hard life ahead of her with no guarantees, and she says, I can't do it. Originally, when I prepared this, I was not going to talk about Orpah. She's just a fringe character. She doesn't matter. But when I look at Orpah and I look at her and I think about how much sorrow she was dealing with at that time, in that moment. I think about the guilt that she would have felt turning back while Ruth and Naomi walked away. I think about how long it would have taken her to move past the guilt that she was feeling and the shame that she felt for not being able to stick with that commitment. And I want to say that for those who feel like they are in Orpah's shoes, there's hope and there's grace. God had grace for Orpah, and God has grace for us when we fall, when the commitment is too much, when we feel like we have to walk away. And God has grace for those who get walked away from. Okay? We see that as Ruth and Naomi continue on together. When I look at the commitment between Ruth and Naomi, I see that these forever soul friendships require resolve. When Ruth said, I will go back with you to your people, and when she followed through, it was not because it was going to be a good time. It was not because she had a secure future waiting for her. It was not because she was even having a great time with Naomi. We'll talk about that in a minute. But she clung to her mother-in-law, and she said, I will not leave you. Naomi says to her, look, your sister-in-law is going back. Now to Naomi, this was proof, right? This was proof. Naomi felt like she had empty hands, and here's the proof of that. Orpah is turning back. I got nothing to offer. Your sister-in-law agrees with me. Why don't you just go so that I can go home and die? That's what she's saying. Your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go with her. Ruth replied, no. She says, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. This is interesting. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. She says, I'm going, and you can't stop me. And nothing's going to separate us, not even death. Wherever you're buried, I'm going to be in the ground with you. It's a little creepy, but, I'm going to be there with you. Not even death will separate us. And Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, so she stopped urging her. She stopped urging her. It's not that Ruth said, I'm going with you, and Naomi said, great, let's go. Naomi did everything in her power to convince Ruth to turn around, and it's only in the face of her persistence. It's only because Ruth has made this statement so clear that they turn and go to Israel. And we have to remember that Ruth was walking into a position where she had just as empty hands as Naomi did. And Naomi wasn't even particularly good company. Okay? Naomi was depressed. If you've ever spent time around a depressed person, if you've ever struggled with depression yourself, you know that depression is a liar. Depression tells us nothing will ever be good again. Depression tells us that even those things that you think are good in your life, nope, they're not good. Depression is a liar. And so as they get back to Israel, Naomi says this to her friends. They say, oh, is it Naomi? She's come home. Don't call me Naomi. Naomi means pleasant. She says, call me Mara, which means bitterness, because the Lord Almighty has made my life bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me, and the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. She's saying this, and I can see Ruth is standing there going, okay, I see where I rank. She went away full, and her hands seemed to her to be empty, but she has one thing. She has one thing. She has the love of another human being. She has the companionship of someone who has said to her, I will stay with you until death. I will stay with you beyond death. Not even death will part us. But she can't see it because depression blinds us from seeing the good things in our life. Depression blinds us from the gifts that God has given. And God has not sent her home empty-handed. God has sent her home with a friend. Here's another thing. Forever friendships get noticed. So Naomi and Ruth, they've come back. We don't know where they're living. Okay? We don't. It doesn't talk about a house. It doesn't talk about them staying with relatives. We have no idea. They could be camping out in a field. Ruth says to Naomi, I think maybe I'm going to go glean in some fields. Do you think that would be okay? And Naomi goes, sure, go. Go. Gleaning was back-breaking work. You know, harvesting is a hard enough job, but gleaning is literally scouring the ground for anything that has been dropped, anything that has been missed. And this is what Ruth has signed herself up for, so that they can have something to eat, something to put in their bellies. And so she goes and she gleans in a field. When she's there, Boaz sees her and goes, who's that? And his field workers tell him, that's Naomi, that's Ruth. She's come back with Naomi. And he goes, oh yeah, I remember her. I remember that story. That was weird, right? Because what daughter-in-law from a foreign people is going to accompany her penniless, broke, childless, husbandless mother-in-law to another country? It just didn't happen. It didn't happen then. I think it would be really weird for it to happen now, right? Mother-in-laws tend to be the source of jokes, not the person we cling to when we've lost all hope. And so he speaks to her. Now I want you to think about this for a second. Boaz is a land-owning person who sits at the city gate with the elders. Ruth is a Moabite. She is a pagan. She is a foreigner. She's not married. She has no connections. And yet he speaks to her. This isn't romantic, by the way. Some people try to turn this into a romance story. This is simply somebody who is in power noticing someone who is weak and saying to them, I commend you for the things that you have done. He speaks to her, and she's so overwhelmed, she bows down with her face to the ground, and she says, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me? And Boaz says, I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father, your mother, your homeland, and came to live with a people you didn't know. And then he gives her this blessing. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. He blesses her. What an amazing, momentous occasion. And why did this happen? Did it happen because he saw her across the field and he thought she was cute? No. That totally weakens the story, okay? He notices her because of her commitment to her mother-in-law, because she has done this extraordinary, miraculous, wonderful thing of accompanying her mother-in-law back, who she is now working hard to support. He notices her. And when she goes home with all of this food that he sends with her, Naomi finally wakes up to some joy. finally wakes up to some joy. And she says to Naomi, I'm going to do something for you. Their committed companionship becomes reciprocal. Up until this point, it has been Ruth doing everything for Naomi. It's been self-sacrificial. It has been loving. It has been caring. And now Naomi wakes up and realizes, I have something I can give you. I have something I can give you. She says to her, my daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Now, her solution to this is crazy, off the charts, scandalous. She says, go get pretty and smell good and go down to the threshing floor in the middle of the night and uncover this man's legs and lay down there and say, when he wakes up, spread the corner of your garment over me. This was not an innocent interaction. This was her saying to him, I want to be your wife and I am willing to start tonight. Okay? I've just got to be clear there. That upsets some people, that's fine. But that's what happened. And what does Ruth do? She does it, right? She listens to Naomi. She listens to this woman and she says, okay, let's do it. Let's do it. And what comes from that, because Boaz says to her, wait, there's someone else who's first in line. Somebody else might have dibs here. That's real romantic, right? Somebody else might have dibs on this relationship. And so I'm not going to take advantage tonight. But here, take all this grain and please quickly leave before the sun comes up and people can see your face. He takes care of the details by talking to this other close family member, by making a contract to not only redeem the land that belonged to Elimelech, but also to marry Ruth. And when he does, they have a child. And that child belongs to who? Not Ruth, not Boaz. That child belongs to Naomi. And so Naomi finds restoration at the end of this story. Naomi holds her grandson in her lap. And this is the gift and the proof that God has not abandoned her. So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. And the Lord enabled her to conceive. They gave birth to a son. And the women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Just back up just a little bit there. Better than 7 sons. Where a daughter didn't rank anywhere on the list. Sons were the only thing that were important. Naomi started the story with 2. And the women of the town say to her, your daughter-in-law is better for you than 7 sons. How much does that commend Ruth? And the thing that she did in linking her life to Naomi's life, this committed companionship that ends up with Naomi taking the child in her arms and caring for him. And the women living there said, Naomi has a son. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse and the father of David. This is God's incorporating Ruth, a Moabite woman, foreigner and a pagan, who did not know God before she went back to Israel with Naomi. She says so in her statement, I'll go back with you to your people and your God will become my God. God honors her commitment. God honors her sacrifice. God restores Naomi, and God puts Ruth in the genealogy of David, and by extension, the genealogy of Christ. God honored this committed companionship by preserving this story for us so that you and I can read about how much God values the relationships that we have. When you and I say to another person, I'll be with you to the very end. Makes God happy. Brings joy to his heart because God is the one who set up human relationships in the beginning. God said it's not good for human beings to be alone. God wants you and I to have these kind of committed companionships in our life. It's what gets us through the hard times. It's what enables us to carry on when it seems like we've lost nothing. God puts these people in our lives. And sometimes God calls us to be the committed companion, the person who says, I will never leave you. And we know that we can trust God to give us the grace and the strength to carry out those commitments that we make, because God has also promised us, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. God is with us, and he has surrounded us with a family of friends. I'm thankful for that this morning.